Hello, Kristen.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I missed you last time. I feel
it's been a long time.
Yeah, it was last time I was on with Matt for us to talk Republican side of the aisle, and an episode that I had termed in my mind to be the circular firing squad. So it's nice to get back to the good old partisan back and forth.
There's plenty of circular firing squads to go around this week. So
yes, that's true.
We should all duck and cover. That's my play for the title of the segment: duck and cover. I guess this week was, I would argue, the first time that Republicans felt they could get into Whitewater mode and try to hit Obama with an actual scandal with this Solyndra case. And since I think the whole thing is bogus, I want to kick it to you to cue it up.
Okay. So, I'm sure the folks watching the show have been following it, but for those who haven't, the story is that this green energy, this green jobs initiative was supposed to be, helping out companies that were engaged in, creating green jobs. And so Solyndra was a company that got a guarantee on a loan of like $535 million. And it was something where I think they'd applied for the loan during the Bush administration, but there are emails that show the Bush administration was sort of tabling it. And so there was a timeline set out for the consideration of it. And it seemed that there was pressure coming from the White House to get the approval of this loan fast-tracked so that Solyndra could be announced, or so that the loan and the support for Solyndra could be announced as part of an Obama supports green jobs, this is how we're going to fix the economy sort of initiative. And Republican investigators have found emails where folks who were approving the loan or figuring out if they were going to approve the loan, doing their due diligence, felt like they were under pressure to do it very quickly in hopes that the White House would be able to use it as a talking point. I think it was Vice President Biden that wound up giving the initial announcement, and then Obama spoke at Solyndra. So this was seen as sort of a big symbol of like the Obama administration's approach to, we're going to use green jobs to boost the economy. We're going to use the government to help jumpstart some of this, help invest in these companies to help them grow. And Solyndra is bankrupt. So the big question now is, to what extent was the Obama administration playing favorites with Solyndra because they either A, wanted a political victory, or B, because there are major investors in Solyndra who are Obama administration friends. And there are kind of two takes on this. You have Michelle Malkin, who is extremely skeptical of the administration, obviously, and her belief is that this is not the first example, or not the last example, rather, that we're going to see of companies that sort of were chosen as favorites by the administration. She wrote this week about another company called Light Squared that has been heavily invested in by Philip Falcone. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, although there's this really ridiculous story about his wife that I read in Vanity Fair a couple months ago. Anyhow, I suggest everyone Google it if you're interested more in this guy and where he comes from. But so I guess the government, the Obama FCC has kind of been intervening on behalf of this company called Light Squared that wants to give satellite-based broadband. And so she thinks that Solyndra is not the last example of the administration trying to fast-track or intervene on behalf of companies that are backed by donors or friends of the administration. On the other hand, you have a more charitable approach by Megan McArdle, where she says, I doubt that the important story here is the one conservatives are pushing, that a major fundraiser was involved in the company. They got the fast-track loan. It's possible, of course, but national politicians tend to have enough sense to steer clear of such grubby quid pro quos. Rather, I think the real story that's emerging is one of questionable judgment. These loans were a part of ARA, which, because the Democrats treated it like a Christmas list for all sorts of things they'd been wanting to do for decades, was full of things like this that didn't really make for optimal stimulus. And this has led to bigger questions where conservative bloggers have started attacking the idea in general of the government spending money on green jobs programs. Not even just Solyndra, even though this is sort of seen as the hallmark failure of this approach. Ed Morrissey at Hot Air says that, with $17.2 billion spent on green jobs programs, the cost per actual job created comes to $4.853 million. There was a Washington Post article with an estimate of how many green jobs have been created as a result of Obama administration efforts. He said that kind of capital could launch entire new businesses, let alone multiple jobs. Any company that ate through $4.853 million to create a job would shortly become a former company, kind of like Solyndra, where $535 million disappeared and took 1,000 jobs along with it. So some people think it's incompetence and bad judgment. Some think it's active corruption, or at the very least, a nice way of giving favors to Obama administration friends. Which even folks who don't think that Obama is corrupt, a lot of conservatives are concerned about the government's intervention on behalf of companies regardless, even if it's not necessarily corruption. The idea of government choosing winners and losers is something that ever since the auto bailout has been like a really potent talking point, sore spot. And this just sort of exacerbates that.
Well, as you might surmise, the view in the liberal blogosphere is slightly different.
Really?
And this is actually a situation, because again, we've talked about this a lot, that a lot of the liberal blogosphere does not see themselves as partners with the Obama White House. They are far more critical of the Obama White House from the left. They don't see themselves as walking in lockstep. But this is the kind of thing taking down from the liberal perspective, a ginned up manufactured outrage type of situation from a right-wing noise machine. This is sort of what the liberal blogosphere was built to deal with. So you saw more bloggers, I think, getting into that mode, get into debunking mode, which is sort of comfortable ground. My Campaign for America's Future colleague, Dave Johnson, has a post called The Phony Solyndra Scandal. Think Progress had a big post, one of the first posts about this from the left, chronicling the full timeline of Solyndra going back to the Bush administration, because it's actually an outgrowth of the 2005 Energy Policy Act that created this loan guarantee program, and how the Bush administration had shepherded the process along. And just again, some of the specific things that you were talking about. What's been in the press so far has been a lot of dribs and drabs of emails that the House Republicans have fed them, and I would suggest if you watch the C-SPAN video of the hearing they just had, you can ask yourself: are the Republicans on this House committee acting as detached, objective investigators trying to get at the truth, or is this just standard political posturing and grandstanding? Because the interruption to answer ratio was way out of whack.
Well, that's every congressional hearing.
I thought it was particularly pronounced.
Okay.
You just see the White House aide just sort of can't get 5 words out of any single answer. And for example, some of this is not just coming from conservative corners; it's coming from the Washington Post and ABC, talking about the question where the White House pressured the Energy Department to accelerate the loan guarantee so Obama or Biden could go do a political appearance at the plant. And Kevin Drum has a post, and he's citing one other person whose name escapes me. I apologize. Talking about there's been a long-standing tension that the Energy Department moves too slowly, and we have to get these loan guarantees out the door. We're trying to ramp up this industry. We're trying to have an impact, and particularly when Obama comes in, it becomes part of a broader stimulus agenda. You have a twofold issue. You have a climate crisis you're trying to avert, and you have an economic crisis you're trying to stop the bleeding with. So you don't want to have unnecessary delays, and this is a critique that conservatives usually have with stimulus. This government is bureaucratic. It takes too long. They're sitting on their hands for no discernible reason. So when you see an email that comes out from a DOE person complaining this is going too fast, It's a data point to be sure, but you certainly need to pull the lens back more and say, okay, well, what is the complaint here? It's possible that the DOE's complaint is because this person is more used to a culture of moving slowly, and not necessarily for a legitimate reason. So there's obviously investigation needs to be done, but as Kevin Drum ends on in his post, look, if you're going to put some emphasis on speed, particularly for stimulus reasons, you're not going to bat 1,000. No one private companies don't bat 1,000 with their investments. Nobody does. So the fact that one company goes bankrupt is not in and of itself evidence that the entire program is rotten.
This is a pretty big whiff, though. This is not just like, oh, we lost $50 million. It's like, this is over $500 million. That's an awful lot.
Well, I don't think that's quite right as far as what the actual taxpayer loss is going to be. But even still, this is $500 million in the annals of the federal government is a drop in the bucket. There's a much larger loan portfolio here.
That's the real shame. Sorry, go ahead.
One could argue that, of course, but you certainly can't judge the entire loan portfolio based on one company. If 49 of 50 companies do great, that's a fantastic record. And to the point you were raising earlier about how many jobs are created here, this is based on the Washington Poster that came out this week. The White House has its own blog post saying, look, this isn't even close to being done. You can't even accurately calculate the number of jobs created when we're not finished yet. And there's also a lot of jobs that are going to be created directly through the supply chain that no one's going to be able to calculate exactly. It's not just about the direct jobs created. It's about the broader economic impact and the environmental impact as well. So just looking at it from that narrow lens is not going to be an accurate predictor. So there's legitimate ideological dispute to be had over the nature of stimulus and whether it's worth doing or not. And it's fair, and as Drum was trying to do, an honest assessment is going to recognize that you're never going to bat 1,000. There's going to be some mistakes along the way. Some companies are not going to pan out. But that's true with private industry as well as public. This is a company that was not just a government creation. There was a loan guarantee. It's not even an actual loan. It's a loan guarantee. And other private investors, including the Waltons, this was the Climate Progress point. This is not just Obama donors. There are big Bush donors that are behind this thing, too. The president was a registered Republican. So these folks thought it was a good bet. And it didn't pan out.
I think the bigger question is why is the government getting in the business of betting on companies then? Like why? What is the benefit then of even if it wasn't a loan, it was a loan guarantee. Then it's basically the government saying if your company fails, you guys will pick up the tab. Which I think that's the broader ideological concern that a lot of conservatives have.
And that's a perfectly fine ideological debate to have. And so you think it's sort of fundamentally wrong for the federal government to be involved in doing this, whether it works well or not, and that's an ideological view. But as far as determining whether it works, the fact that one company doesn't do well is not absolutely determinative because that's a given that not every company is going to pan out. And from the liberal perspective, the question is, if there is a public good to be gained by ramping up clean energy companies, because there's going to be multiple benefits for the overall community in energy independence, averting a climate crisis, creating jobs, affordable energy choices, etc. But they can't get off the ground as quickly because there's a lot of experimental technology here that private industry is not going to put all the chips in themselves. That's where there is a proper role for the government to step in. It's not like Obama put some fast one on the public that he was going to do things like this. It was pretty clear that was his ideological predilection when he ran for office. So I think there was a mandate to do it, and now it's perfectly fair to assess how well is it working. But let's look at the entire portfolio, just because if there's something actually untoward and there was actual political favoritism, obviously that's worth talking about. I don't think that is proven at all at this point. But just that one company goes bankrupt does not in and of itself tells you that the entire premise is flawed.
I think that the fact that this was a company where there was so much attention, and this was something that was promoted by the administration, like this was not just one in a portfolio of thousands that didn't really get attention and were blowing out of proportion, I think, because this was one that was sort of a centerpiece and an example of look at what we're doing. I mean, this is one where you had the administration, they were visiting the factory, they were giving speeches there. I think that's why this one, to conservatives, it doesn't just get, well, you can't bat 1,000 as an okay argument, because this was like a signature program.
I would concede it makes it more embarrassing for the White House that they put so much emphasis on this one company. And I totally understand why Republicans want to exploit that sort of embarrassment. But just because Obama or Biden made a personal appearance there, I mean, it was the first one out of the box. It was the first one out of the box because the Bush administration put so much emphasis on it. So, again, they're trying to go shovel ready. This one already has its paperwork done. The Bush administration, as the Republicans are saying, well, they didn't approve it in January 2009, and West saying, well, they just tabled it to get more information. We got them more information, and so we proceeded. Do more investigation to see whose story is correct there. But certainly, work was done here. It was not just pulled out of a hat randomly, and that's why it ended up being first out of the box. And there's also the possibility it's being raised by some on the left that the company may simply have misled the government, and they might be criminally liable for doing that if that's the case. But of course, that's not proving it either. That needs to be investigated.
Yeah, I think
so. It's embarrassing. I agree with you. It's embarrassing, and this is always a big hurdle for liberal projects in general, because nobody bats 1,000, something's going to go wrong somewhere, and an opponent is going to exploit it. I happen to think it's pretty notable that 3 years into a $780 billion stimulus program, this is pretty much the only potential scandal that exists, and I wouldn't even call it a scandal.
Okay, that's a bold statement. I mean, I'll give you a fun example. I think I've brought this up on the show before. I mean, if you Google, Mary Catherine Ham at the Daily Caller has done this kind of funny video where she stands in front of a dog park in DuPont Circle, a wealthy neighborhood of Washington, D.C., a dog park that was built with stimulus funds, but it was specifically that the stimulus was not supposed to be building dog parks. And here, the closest stimulus project to the White House is a dog park in a wealthy neighborhood. And so she does this kind of funny video in front of it, like, these wealthy residents of DuPont Circle could never have built this on their own. I mean, like, to say that Solyndra is the only example of, like, a dumb project that came out of the stimulus is definitely incorrect. I just think this is the most high profile. A dog park in DuPont Circle is small potatoes ultimately. $500 billion is not.
You'll forgive me if I don't take Mary Catherine Ham's word on that particular project.
Well, sure, it's real. It's there. It's not a green screen.
I will not accede to anything on that basis. But conservatives being particularly good at ginning up these things, I think if they had a better case of scandal before Solyndra, we would have heard about it. It would have gotten outside of the Fox News swamp and into ABC and Washington Post. And this is the only one I think that's gotten that far, which I just speak to. I mean, if this was a target-rich environment for conservatives to be firing on, they haven't hit very many.
Well, part of the reason why the stimulus wasn't particularly successful either is because infrastructure project type things, or places where you might see big things going bust, wasn't actually that big a part of it, which was one of the big criticisms, I think, retroactively, in hindsight.
Criticism of the left, because it was half tax cuts, which Republicans tend not to give Obama credit for.
Which is also sort of the makeup of his latest jobs plan.
We could segue to that.
Yes. So tell me, what was the left's reaction to his speech last week?
Well, yeah, interesting, because, again, the left, particularly the online left, is often very critical of the president, and there's been great haranguing that there isn't more being done on jobs, and there was a great push to get the president to propose a big and bold plan. And, while what the president proposed was not, FDR New Deal direct public works for the most part, it still was pretty big. And the emphasis was squarely on jobs, and the way that he presented it, line in the sand, pass this bill. If you don't pass this, then you don't care about jobs. That overall fighting tone was something that the left has wanted to see for a while. And so, not that it was criticism-free, but you certainly had some of the more positive reactions from the online left than you had in a long time. But that is starting to dissipate somewhat because of two reasons. One, the White House has a little bit of a two-pronged message, depending on the way the question is asked, whether they are demanding that the bill be passed, as is, or if they're willing to accept pieces of it. And David Axelrod has gone on TV saying this is not a la carte. We think this all works as one package. But when the press has been asked point blank, or Jay Carney's been asked point blank, what if the House passes just pieces of it, most likely the tax cut pieces, what would you do? They say we would sign a part of it and then ask for more. From one vantage point, that is a perfectly understandable, realistic approach to governing. You take what you can get, and if you're trying to do something on jobs, and your argument is this is not a time to be ideological or partisan, let's do as most as we can together. You're not in a great position to turn down anything that's put in front of you if at least it was part of your idea in the first place. But you have some folks are left, complaining that this is another example of the president, shrinking from a fight and talking points memo, which is not really, a place for too much pontification these days. It's a little more newsy. They are sort of tracking the administration's quotes on it, which I think is stirring some, renewed anxiety that this kind of fight is going to have limited impact. And then you have another angle happening, which is some of the more conservative Democrats are complaining about the plan, saying that it's stimulus redux, or it's Mary Landrieu complaining about closing the loopholes for oil companies, or Jim Webb complaining about the pay-fors that would be raising taxes on the wealthy. And there's some complaining from liberal congressmen, too, about the payroll tax cut part of it. There's always been a bit of anxiousness that the president has been willing to do temporary payroll tax cuts because of the fear that's going to weaken, politically weaken Social Security. And you having some commentary about how conservative Democrats are being pathetic here again, and John McCohen, the New Republic, was talking about that, although we also had a second post saying it could be that the New York Times and Politico are overstating the disunity amongst Democrats by quoting a handful of people when the vast majority of the Democratic caucus is for it. An interesting post was from Matt Iglesias saying, this is why the whole, governing by speeches argument doesn't work, and sort of taking a jab at some of the critics from the left, saying Obama should be stumping more and wheeling and dealing less. And Iglesias is saying, look, he's doing exactly what people have wanted him to do. Let's get out on the road, bring it to the people, get everyone to rise up and pressure Congress. And we are learning very quickly that there's no magic to that strategy. That doesn't automatically bring Congress to their knees once the president gives a few speeches. It wasn't the case for FDR either. He did a lot of stuffing in his second term to pressure conservative Democrats. He didn't get very far with it either. So there's all sorts of consternation coming out now that maybe I think for several days Obama had a pretty good run of media and clear messaging, and now that's starting to fracture a bit on a number of fronts.
I think part of the reason why you've seen that there's no magic in the strategy of trying to go and rally the people to call Congress is that there was, I think, enough from a public opinion standpoint, enough kind of damage done by the perception that the last stimulus didn't work that there's not enough energy out there, maybe even in Democratic crowds, to get people riled up. There was a Bloomberg poll this week that 51% of people don't think that the new jobs plan will work, which isn't. It's a majority. It's not 60 or 70%, so it's not a total panic area. But that's not very good to roll out a plan and before it kind of even becomes a piece of legislation for people to already not have faith in it. So I think that's where that sort of lack of magic has become. There was a conservative blogger, Brian Preston, at the PJ Tatler, who mentioned that this week James Carville came out. He said it's time for the White House to panic. And that there were 4 things that they need to do to show the public that Obama is changing course. Fire people, indict people, state his case, and then keep stating his case, which sounds similar to the, get him out on the road, get him selling the policy idea. But Brian's post says, Carville says Obama should fire his economic team. Great, but most of the original team is already gone. And there's something missing from Carville's advice, and it's rather important: policy. Nowhere does James Carville advise the president to change course on substantive policy. Everything he does has to do with appearances. Push the panic button, fire, indict, but don't change the policy. And it's not the appearances, it's the policy that's left the country in an economic malaise.
That's not, I would quibble with that, because there's a line in Carville's piece where he tells Obama to essentially talk about jobs more and austerity less, which is essentially telling the White House, don't talk about cutting Medicare and Social Security, just talk about investment in jobs. So he's telling Obama to crank it up to 11 on the infrastructure part of the Jobs Act, and not toward the deficit reduction stuff. So that would be a shift in policy agenda for the White House.
It looks as though this package, which has a pretty big price tag, that there's about $250 billion in tax cuts, and that there's about $100 billion in with $50 billion in infrastructure, $10 billion for an infrastructure bank, like $25 billion for rebuilding school facilities and things like that. And then there's, I think it's like $100 and some billion that is more, it's like the unemployment insurance and stuff like that. And it's the full package contains a lot of things that I think, if a la carte, you would get a lot of Republicans supporting. And I don't think it's just the tax cuts. You have, going back to Megan McArdle, she says, economically, this is mostly treading water while we wait for something to change. It's hard, but it's hard for Obama to call for altruism on the part of congressional Republicans when he wasn't willing to take the manly risk of saying out loud what taxes he'll raise or spending he'll cut. This has been one of the biggest complaints.
But he has said that.
He said, well, Congress will figure it out. It's up to you guys. We'll roll out the pay for soon enough.
They're in the bill. They specifies what tax deductions for the wealthy that he wants to eliminate, and what taxables for the oil and gas industry he wants to eliminate. That's in the bill. This was
more in reference to the speech. Was that the speech was all, here's the goodies that I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to let big bad Congress pass the bill that has all the mean, nasty stuff.
But if 3 days later he puts it in the bill, who cares where it wasn't in the speech in the first place?
Well, and what I will be interested to see is if when he goes out on the road to sell this, obviously from a political standpoint, you don't want to talk about the painful side of it. But ultimately, if he doesn't, Republicans are going to. And so, to what extent does the White House need to get out ahead of saying, by the way, here's how we expect to pay for it, and talking about that side, because since it was absence from the speech, there are a lot of people who were questioning how they were going to get to this number, if it really was going to be properly paid for, or if this is going to be part of a pattern of letting Congress work it out.
I find it's a very odd complaint for conservative Republicans to make. If the president gives a speech and leaves part of the final answer blank, or he then fills in the blank in his bill but doesn't really emphasize it a lot, that's not a duplicitous maneuver. That is an opening. So if the House Republicans really cared, if they really wanted to pass a jobs bill, they really wanted to come together and find common ground, that's open to say, okay, I don't like your pay-fors, I will come up with my own, and we'll find a way to reach a compromise. That tends to be how the legislative process works when you're actually doing it in good faith. I'm sure if the Republicans wanted to find some middle ground on spending cuts and tax increases to pay for the payroll tax cuts and the small business tax cuts and the infrastructure bank, which is to leverage private investment infrastructure, which is co-sponsored by a Republican and backed by the Chamber of Commerce. If they really wanted to do that, the president's posture is a wide opening to do it. He's not saying my way or the highway.
Well, no, I think you saw, Boehner came out and said, I'm open to reading through this. When the bill comes to my desk, we'll review it. I mean, there was not an initial out-of-hand dismissal of this whole thing. Because I think both sides realize that the economy is in such a disastrous mess right now that it is not sustainable to continue, not even just politically, but I mean that you can't keep screwing around anymore. I think one of the biggest problems is going to be when it comes to the pay-fors, to what extent are, I mean, this is going to be in many ways, I think, debt ceiling rehash when it comes to, so how are we going to balance all this stuff? Like this is, I think, unfortunately, this is inevitably going to shift away from a what will create jobs debate to a how will we pay for this debate? And I think that is the unfortunate outcome of Obama not saying, here's my full plan, here's how I'd like to pay for the plan, you guys go ahead. By sort of leaving that deficit side a little more up in the air when he gave the speech, I think that it risks making this go back to being a spending and deficit conversation, which I think, as you mentioned, James Carville would probably not be a big fan of. Don't make this...
Well, and I think that's exactly why the president isn't spending all of his time on that, because he is trying to galvanize public pressure for the Congress to do something on jobs. But to make the whole discussion about how do you pay for it means that you're not talking about jobs. And again, if we're dealing with a Congress that wanted to legislate, they would not care and find a way to make the pay-fors in a way that was more amenable to them and say, I'm doing something on jobs, President. I dare you to veto this. And the President probably would not, because he wants to pass a jobs bill.
Well, I think the one other interesting post I saw was from Michael Walsh at The Corner, who talks about this idea that President Obama may be, in fact, trying to make Congress, not just Republicans in Congress, but Congress as a whole, the enemy. He calls it's kind of the Truman strategy. He says, has President Obama outsmarted himself with his insistent pass the bill now mantra? With the economy approaching free fall, his chin hanging out, yet his fellow Democrats seem strangely loath to pack him up. Maybe it's because they've figured out he's setting them up to be the fall guys. And mentions, that Jim Webb called it terrible. He mentions a bunch of Democrats that say, Obama doesn't intend this to pass in its full, as it's currently structured, and it's not that great. That he thinks that some Democrats in Congress are wising up to the fact that they're going to be lumped in, set up as like the bad guys against Obama, the job-creating hero.
I think that is probably a fallback position for the White House if they can't get it passed, and there's obviously a high probability that they can't, considering the divided makeup of Congress. You at least want the public to believe that we're the guys trying and they're the guys obstructing, which is how Truman did manage to get reelected in 1948. But I also think here, you were presuming that this debate would sort of naturally get to a how do we pay for it phase, and I'm not sure it's going to get there. This debate might just sort of stall out on its own when it doesn't go anywhere, which it very well may not. But right around the corner is the supercommittee. The supercommittee has to come up with some sort of plan by November 23rd, or automatic cuts to the military and healthcare providers kick in. And they come up with their plan by November 23rd, then the full Congress has to vote on it up or down by December 23rd. And I think most folks would say that that's the only train that's probably going to leave the station, and that might not even be a high probability train. But if you had a true bipartisan compromise on the broader deficit reduction question that involves some reform of entitlements, that involves higher taxes on the wealthy, and maybe now also includes an upfront investment in jobs piece, if you do it all together, then you would negate the pay for question, because you're not just paying for it, you're paying for a much larger chunk of deficit reduction. And if they did it in a big way, you might get a huge positive push from Wall Street. You might get a huge positive push from the military lobby because they're getting saved from sequestration. And that might be a harder train to stop if four Democrats and four Republicans actually came together on it. So I would think that is the end game that the White House is trying to achieve. They want to be able to say that they did it all, that they got the upfront investment in jobs and they solved the deficit reduction puzzle on top of all the other things that they've passed over the last 3 years. So I don't think they're necessarily trying terribly hard to get this being passed in up or down fashion right now, because I think all the evidence is that's not terribly likely. But the supercommittee train, again, maybe not a high probability train, but there are more ducks lined up there than maybe people recognize.
But see, what I think is the biggest question that then raises in my mind is that if the administration really doesn't think this is going to pass on an up or down vote right away, then why was pass this bill right now, right away, right now, right away, pass this bill? Like, why was that the refrain of the speech? Was it just to put the pressure on so that when it doesn't happen, okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
there also
as I
might
said it,
be.
I'm like, oh, okay, no, that actually is making sense as I'm asking the question.
But there also may be a hope that it actually would pass. But I think more likely it's just to make very clear. We're not dicking around. We want to do this right away. And if they don't want to do it right away, they have to explain themselves. So it's to the extent that Obama succeeds in getting that message out. That either actually gives Republicans some pressure to pass something themselves, whether it's just the tax cut piece for the whole thing or what have you, or puts pressure to wrap it into the supercommittee process so they can, say they did it that way. But there was that Politico article this week where there does seem to be a divide within the Republican caucus. Do we want to give Obama a win or not? And the Boehner and Cantor messaging, which, as you noted, is somewhat soft. It is not dismissing it all out of hand. And maybe that's just for show, or maybe that's because they're actually entertaining some sort of compromise. And Politico got some quotes from Republicans saying, "What's wrong with Boehner? Why is he entertaining this? Why would you even think of giving Obama a win right now when his back's against the wall?" And that presumably would include a tax cut only bill, which would normally be perfectly happily embraced by Republicans. But it means Obama's gets to sign a tax cut only bill. There's some Republicans saying, "Don't give Obama that freebie."
Which, by the way, and this is a total sidebar, but what Republicans or anybody in politics really think it's smart to tell a reporter, "Don't give the president a win," like as if you're wishing that the economy stays bad so that you could win the presidency? Like, who says that? Okay.
Not smart politicians.
Rant over. Sorry.
But,
I get really frustrated when people give really dumb quotes to reporters like that, where I'm like.
And I would argue that you find those sorts of quotes more often come from congressional Democrats and congressional Republicans. So I'm happy to see the burden be shared. But so to the extent that Obama can exploit stuff like that, that's going to possibly strengthen the hand of a Boehner saying, "Look, I'd rather us be seen as doing something here." And who knows what's going on in Boehner's head? Maybe Boehner is saying, "Look, I don't know if we have a good shot at the White House this time around. I'd rather keep my speakership, quite frankly. So I'm willing to cut a deal with President Obama on this because that's going to mean I keep more seats in the House." I'm just totally making up a whole cloud. I have no idea what he's thinking. But certainly his messaging out of this does suggest he knows that there is a risk in just being seen as obstructionist on a very hot issue right now.
I think that, you know what, I continue, I'm not going to be cynical. I do ultimately believe that both Boehner and Obama would like to see the unemployment rate go down. And not just for their own political futures or fortunes, but because I really do believe they don't like the idea that unemployment is so high. They don't like that this many Americans are out of work. So I think because I sort of have faith in at least Boehner, and I don't believe that Obama is just, I differ from many conservative bloggers in that I don't think his motives are horrible in this case. I do think he would like to see unemployment go down, and not just because he wants to get reelected. So while I think I think it'll actually be easier to solve this than it'll be to solve the debt and deficit issues, for sure.
But it may be that doing it all together is the easiest path because
the grand bargain.
Well, right, and
the super bargain.
I mean, to give Obama a straight-up win on jobs might be too much of a political pill for Republicans to swallow. But if doing it in the context of other political risk for Obama, including essentially effective benefit cuts in Medicare, looks like Social Security might be off the table, but Medicare might be on the table. Knowing that this wasn't going to be a clean win for the president. And both parties sort of, holding hands and taking the plunge together. And if you think that's crazy, and it might be crazy, but consider this. You do have several Republicans who are on the supercommittee who would not dismiss out of hand when asked point blank if they would accept revenue increases as part of this deal. I believe at least 3 who have not dismissed the prospect. And you have the top staffer of the supercommittee, a Republican who engineered the Bush Sr. tax hike deal of 1990. And you have pretty much all the Democrats on the committee, I think, obviously willing to do some kind of grand bargain like that. you can see, and on top of that, there's this whole trigger mechanism, which has the military lobby out, in full press saying, don't let this end up in gridlock because then the hammer comes down on us. And certainly the military industry funds a lot of Republican congressional campaigns. So you certainly have more pressure points and more people in place to do the grand bargain than you might have presumed could be achieved, considering how the last two deals went down. Now, that does not mean it's high probability, but I think it does suggest, as you were saying, that both Obama and Boehner want to keep this option open, have some inclination to do this, and it's just a question of getting their caucuses to come around. And so it looks like they've tried to construct a situation that might change the political dynamics from where they've been the past few months.
I like your optimism.
It's pessimism to some.
Well,
I'm just saying I think it's actually possible.
Well, Obama's... go ahead,
right.
Sorry.
I was going to shift topic.
I was too. I was trying to come up with a creative way to do it.
And I didn't have any other.
Okay. New York 9?
New York 9.
Okay.
So, speaking of weak political standing, there's my segment.
There we go.
A couple months ago, everyone thought Republicans were dead in the water because they lost in upstate New York, primarily over the House Republican Medicare plan. Now everyone thinks the Democrats are in jeopardy because they lost in New York City, Brooklyn and Queens, Anthony Weiner's former seat. And there seems to be a lot of speculating what exactly was the reason why this district shifted. I don't think there's been a clear consensus on it, but what are the conservative bloggers saying they are claiming the reason is?
So you have Carrie Lucas at the Independent Women's Forum blog who says that this was a rejection of big government. You have Jim Antle at American Spectator blog who says that this was, he mentions the National Organization for Marriage. Opponents of same-sex marriage are now claiming victory in the special election to replace disgraced Democrat Anthony Weiner. NOM claims 42% of the district opposes same-sex marriage, and the Democrats supported changing the state's marriage laws. So there are some folks who are crediting it to just general kind of anti-Obama, frustration with the status quo, frustration with the era of big government-ness. There are some people who are saying that it was all about the same-sex marriage and sort of socially conservative folks in the district may have pushed it the other way. And then you have, and this wasn't from a conservative, this is just from a Politico analysis, something that you always see whenever one of these special elections goes down is the losing candidate gets blamed for being a bad candidate, or in his campaign ran a bad campaign. So they had ads that sort of looked like they vaguely may have referenced 9/11 indirectly, and they had to pull some ads. And so there's lots of theories about why this happened, and I think in the same way that anybody who has a unified theory for why an election did or did not happen, I am skeptical of. For the folks who said that Republicans lost those last special elections because of the Ryan plan, now they're saying, well, the Ryan plan didn't have anything to do with it. I mean, the Democrat ran ads about the Ryan plan in this election, and it appears not to have, it didn't cost the Republican side the pickup. So I think, one, it shows that the Ryan Care issue is not as powerful as people assumed it was. It is not the dragon killer that Democrats probably thought it was coming out of the last round of special elections. I think the best take on it is from Jim Garrity at National Review, who pretty much says that he cautions anyone who thinks that this special election result means something bigger and greater for the future. He says, it's worth noting that special election victories don't always foreshadow the trend of the following elections. Democrats enjoyed special election wins by Scott Murphy and Bill Owens in New York, Ted Deutsch in Florida, and Mark Kritz in Pennsylvania in 2009 and 2010, all before getting thrashed in the 2010 midterms. The GOP won special elections with John Campbell and Brian Bilbray in California in 2005 and 2006, but then went on to lose the House and Senate in 2006. A GOP sweep on Tuesday, this he's writing before the election, would set the conventional wisdom that 2012 is shaping up to be a tremendously difficult year for the Democrats. But, it's sort of couched in that caution that just because just because you pick up a seat doesn't mean you are winning the next election that's a year down the road. that in these special elections, they are just sort of weird little laboratories where, especially if a member has left under an incredibly bizarre, scandalous situation like Anthony Weiner, I mean, you've already sort of polluted the water there where it's not an accurate laboratory. So as much as, you'll see a lot of conservative pundits saying, like, this is a sign that Obama's coattails are dead. And I don't doubt that Obama's terrible polling numbers did not help Democrats in this district. But I don't think that this special election is necessarily a sign of great news for things to come for Republicans. Obama's polling numbers are weak right now, but he can still absolutely pull this out and thrash the Republicans next November. So I don't like dancing in the end zone before we scored a touchdown.
It's interesting you mentioned Weiner there, because you actually seem very little analysis suggesting that the fact that Weiner's scandal was part of the issue here, and maybe it's because it just wasn't, but you would think that might have come up more, and certainly some folks on the left have noted this is a fairly conservative district for New York City, and that part of it went for Bush in 2004, and I've been to a wedding in Howard Beach. I can tell you that is not a liberal playground by any measure. But you also had some folks on the left who, again, the folks who are trying to argue that Obama is blowing it. David Dayen at Fire Dog Lake, saying this is a wipeout. Democrats both in New York 9 and the Nevada election that just took place. Which is considered a bit of a swing district, an area that Obama would have to win if he was going to win the state in 2012, and trying to push the notion that this is at Obama's feet, whereas you have Jamel Bowie at the American Prospect, you're having a bit more of a nuanced analysis and talking about more of the idiosyncrasies of the district and saying you really can't extrapolate this. It's not great for Obama, but it's not necessarily that all is lost either. And of course, there's the whole Jewish aspect of the district, because there's a heavy Orthodox Jewish population. It's a more conservative population than the Jewish population nationally, and amongst conservative Jews, there's a lot of consternation about Obama's approach towards Israel and Palestine. And Jeffrey Goldberg at The Atlantic was suggesting that there's this, you can say that the conservative Jews are hugely overreacting to what Obama's doing and being sort of silly about the whole thing. But there's sort of that strain is there in the Jewish community, and sort of what's a little bit unknown is this just the conservative Jews that never were with Obama in the first place, and we're never going to like having a more honest broker type stance towards Israel-Palestine, or is he actually losing some of the more liberal Jews who normally vote Democratic, because they're being pushed away because of this policy? And it's a little bit harder to discern, although Politico has made some interesting points that even though that feeling clearly is there on the ground in this district, since Obama just engineered this rescue of Israeli diplomats out of Egypt, that was a fairly spontaneous and daring move. They're done, at the drop of a hat at the request of Netanyahu, and Netanyahu has showered praise on the president, showing this shows how the close relationship of the United States and Israel has not, been hampered one bit. That we're as close as ever. None of that has yet to trickle down into. Certainly not the conservative Jewish community. Maybe it has other parts of the Jewish community, but they're not necessarily embracing that as a chance to take a step back and just, maybe Obama doesn't hate Israel. Maybe Obama, like every other American president, still sees Israel as an ally. And I don't know if that would eventually change as this story sort of just happened, and it hasn't quite gotten a lot of news attention, despite how dramatic it apparently was. Whether that story gets told over the next several days and change people's perceptions, I doubt it. But it's something to watch to see if the established narrative of Obama and Israel starts to change because of that. Yeah,
I think that one of the other reasons why the idea of Obama's relationship with the Jewish community is going to be a critical story over the next year is because, in New York, that's interesting. In Florida, it's a really big deal. And so I think because of Florida's enormous power in terms of selecting our next president, I think that you will. I think I think analysis of Obama's relationship with the Jewish community and perceptions about his policy toward Israel, this is not going away.
Well, I don't want to go on too long, but I do want to get to the Republican debate, the second Republican presidential debate this month, and it certainly seems to be crystallizing the race as a Perry-Romney race, although perhaps there are some Bachmann supporters out there that want to push back on that. I'm sure the Ron Paul supporters want to push back on that, but they're that's what they do. But what are conservative bloggers saying here? I think in general, both you and Matt have noted that a lot of the conservative bloggers have been on the Perry train from the get-go, but that was the first debate where the Perry pile-on started to happen, and some attacks from the right, chiefly coming from Michelle Bachmann, while Romney's trying to hit Perry from the left to an extent on Social Security. Is there any hesitation in the conservative blogosphere for now? Is anyone saying, "Oh, wait, maybe let's see how Perry wears before we all conclude that he should be our guy"?
Yes. Well, there's. If you're pro Perry, chances are you're still pretty pro Perry after that debate. But I think one of the best sort of more cautious takes was Jennifer Rubin at Washington Post Right Turn, where she says, Perry, I would suggest, should take a few days off from the campaign trail. He should enlist some advisors with presidential campaign experience and go through his positions issue by issue. He needs to know what he thinks and why he thinks it, and then he needs to articulate consistent views at every opportunity. Right now, he appears to be confused or in over his head. It's not an acceptable image for a presidential candidate, and it suggests he didn't fully understand that a presidential campaign is fundamentally different from a gubernatorial race in a red state. Unfortunately for his campaign, an impression is forming that without prompting and a phalanx of nationally experienced staff, he is adrift. Because, this was his first big, how will he perform on the national stage moment. And while I think he started off very strong, and there was an interesting exchange that I thought both he and Romney navigated pretty well, where they sparred over job creation. There was a good exchange where they sort of sparred over Social Security. Neither side has the complete answer yet, but I think Perry handled himself well through that. Then you get to the second half of the debate, and it's where things really started to go downhill because that's when that pile-on began.
I'm sorry, go on.
I think that ultimately, while Perry wound up walking away from that a bit damaged because he made some flubs. I don't know that they're full-scale, Joe Biden-level gaffes, but they were, he said at one point, Michelle Bachmann, she brought up the HPV issue, and that has been the issue that has been really tearing up the blogosphere this week, is Michelle Bachmann's criticism valid that Perry ultimately wanted to, require the injection of vaccine into girls, and is that something that the government ought to be doing? And then there's been a really big Bachmann backlash about are we comfortable with somebody as a candidate for our party coming out on stage sounding like Jenny McCarthy, talking about that vaccines are dangerous. And I think there is now a consensus of bloggers who are strongly conservative but are concerned that Michelle Bachmann is, quote, jumping the shark. This is Eric Erickson at Red State. He went through and he did sort of a quick analysis of every candidate's performance in the debate. And he says Michelle Bachmann seems to have hit the self-destruct button on her campaign. Even Ed Rollins, who was her big advisor, who just recently stepped down, is less than all in for her, it seems. Then he gets to Perry and he says, "Well, the crowd was with him. When the crowd was with him, Perry was great. When the crowd turned on him on the HPV issue, he went downhill and did so fast. He's not a very good debater." So I think there's, even among bloggers who are very pro-Perry, Eric Erickson it was the Red State gathering is where Rick Perry announced his candidacy, and yet he's not even really holding back on saying, that Perry didn't do so well. Now the big question is how, are there people out there who only watch the first hour of a debate and then say, I have a life, I can't watch 2 hours of this? If maybe the fact that Perry is much better in the first half than the second, I'd rather have it be that way than the other way around if I was working for Perry.
But nobody watches debates, period.
Well,
it's all what comes in after the debate that gets put into the loop.
Exactly. And for the reporters who watch the whole thing, what's bad for Perry is that there was some consensus, like, well, he definitely is a front runner, and he's not a disaster. He didn't totally bomb, but he's got a lot of real weaknesses, and the rest of the field is not going to give him a pass. And I think that was what the dynamic that emerged, was that people are not piling on to Romney. And I think in part that's because Romney's run before. Romney's bad stuff is like well-traveled territory. Everybody knows that he's got weaknesses on the Massachusetts healthcare bill. All of the things that would come out about Romney, they're kind of out there. Nothing's flashy, nothing's new, nothing's grabbing headlines. Whereas every time people light into Perry, it's something new that hasn't been heard on the national scene before. And so that's why I think you're going to see Perry really have to hit back hard when these other conservatives try to take a piece of him in future debates.
You're saying as Romney is sort of a comfortable old shoe that, maybe it's got a little scuffed around, but it feels so snug on your foot.
We love nominating the comfortable shoe. We love nominating the comfortable shoe.
But it seems that, I sort of had three takeaways from what you're saying. One, you seem to be suggesting that even amongst conservative bloggers, if not saying this that bluntly, that they think Romney's got a shot here. That he's not being dismissed by conservative bloggers as the way he might have been earlier. And secondly, it seemed like there's a bit of a division between what about Perry to be concerned about. Is it the HPV thing that essentially is not conservative enough on liberty type issues? But the Jennifer Rubin critique, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rubin is primarily focused on foreign policy issues, and I would consider her a neocon, and Perry has planted his flag on getting out of Afghanistan. And I know there's been some neocon consternation that Perry is not going to carry that flag. So is it possible that Jennifer Rubin is, while she's saying he needs to think through his positions, is actually saying, I don't like your position on the issue that's most important to me?
But I think that is entirely possible, but I don't think that makes the criticism wrong. Because the example that she leads into that paragraph with is about HPV and how he initially, had this policy. It never really got put into place because it was an executive order that got overruled in the courts. So, first it was, well, no one was ever actually injected. So it was sort of like a defense, like it was a good idea, but it never actually did anything bad, so, absolve me of any guilt. And then he came out and said, well, no, you know what, it was wrong for me to try to do it through executive order. But he didn't step back from the idea that it was still a good idea to try to vaccinate, to try to get Gardasil to be more widely used. And now he's changed his position again to be like the whole thing was a bad idea. So what I think she's saying is that this was a guy who I really think 3 months ago did not think he was going to run for president. And, Newt Gingrich's campaign imploded, people moved over, and now he's got to run, and it's, you're expected to have a jobs plan. You're expected, and I think that, I'm sure that his campaign knew that this HPV thing was going to be an issue, but maybe hadn't fully thought through what's our current position on it. And because of that perceived squishiness on it, is Perry going to fold, or are we going to see any curveballs come out in future debates?
Right. Perry had always defended it while governor. Mm-hmm. He never flinched on it, and then all of a sudden, 2 days after he announced, he went up to New Hampshire and said it was a mistake without, I don't believe, really explained what the mistake was, and now he's sort of landed on, well, it was a mistake for procedural reasons. Maybe I should then opt in instead of opt out, but essentially still defending it. And Perry's whole shtick is that he's sort of, Mr. Macho Texas guy. I'm strong, and no one's stronger than me. No one's got more testosterone than me. And so once he starts getting into, gets sort of turned around and having to give if you're explaining you're losing kind of posture, how does that make him any different than Romney, who has suffered these sorts of things when talking about healthcare and whatnot? The knock on Romney is that he's sort of flip-flop extraordinaire. Yeah. But if Perry's going to start sounding like that on certain issues, instead of just saying, look, I did this, and if you don't like it, too bad, how does that make Perry any different than Romney? I think I would agree. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, and that's another piece of the Eric Erickson post was when he's talking about Romney, he says the prior flip-flops in Romney's record are weighing him down as an opportunist. Voters want a fighter. They also want to know what they are getting. Voters may not agree with Perry, but they think they know what they are getting with him, and maybe not with Romney. So if Perry loses that, I know what I'm getting with him advantage, either through actually changing his positions or just having not fully thought through totally what he believes and saying something in a debate that's not 100% thought through and then having to backpedal on it afterwards. Those are two ways where he could lose that strategic advantage.
Well, why don't we leave it on that note?
Okay.
Always good to talk to you, Kristen. I'm glad we could get back in the groove.
Oh, yeah. It's good to have you back.
And where can people find your work when we're not talking to me?
KristenSoltis.com is the primary place you can find it. And I've also recently started blogging at Independent Women's Forum's Inkwell. So that's where you can check out. That's the primary place I will be posting these days.
Excellent. And you can see me at ourfuture.org and liberaloasis.com, where the Liberal Oasis Radio Show podcast is housed. And until next week, we'll catch you on the Weekend Blog. Take care.